Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and today I'm going to be bringing you my Flagberg deck profile, updated for DZ Set 8. So Flagberg as a deck is really old at this point. This is a deck that was initially released in BT3, and it has gotten a splattering of support pretty much like since then. Some of it has been good, some of it has not been so good. But, you know, unfortunately, as it stands right now, the deck is very much lacking for a new Vanguard, just because this one is just so outdated for the current metagame, and he's kind of just relying on the good support that he's gotten to kind of carry the deck to some level of playability. But with all the negativity out of the way, let's go and hop straight into the deck profile. So obviously starting off where we always do with the ride line, I've opted to do something a little unconventional. I am actually going to be playing the Cristianos ride line. So let's go ahead and go over it. So the grade 0 is obviously just standard D starter, but the grade 1, the Strawberra, is when she is ridden over by the grade 2, you draw 2 cards and then you may discard, and then you have to discard 2 cards. So it's a little bit of extra filtering. With the inclusion of 1 new card from the latest set, we do have access to a little bit more recursion. And of course this time, not so costly recursion. So it means that if you're discarding your pieces in the early game, it's perfectly fine because you have access to your drop zone a lot more now with that new card. Now, of course, the grade 2 unfortunately doesn't really do anything. He has a skill when he's ridden over by Cristianos, but obviously we're not doing that. So we're never going to be getting that skill, which just leaves our top end, the Flagberg Dragon himself. Now, of course, being a BT3 card, he only has 1 skill, which is when he attacks CB1, and then you perform all the following according to the number of attacks you've done this turn. So if you have 3 or more, you just draw a card, CB1 draw a card, okay, whatever. And then 4 or more, you choose 2 of your opponent's rear guards and you retire them. This is actually misprinted. It shouldn't say your opponent chooses, but instead you choose. And then of course the 5 or more attack, he gets an extra 10k power, and then he gets triple door, so your opponent has to guard with 3 cards from hand in order to actually block his attack. So obviously, unfortunately, that skill was pretty good back in BT3. It was decent, but unfortunately, needing to get to 5 attacks to even get a 10k, so it's possible your Vanguard doesn't even hit over defensive, is pretty rough. And the triple door is, you know, would be cool, but now we do actually have good blitz orders and we have Elementaria, so there's so many ways of just countering the Flagberg now, just that he just does not have as much pressure as he used to. All right, so moving on into the main deck, of course, we are going to be playing the 3 copies of Persona Ride. Like I said, you're a multi-attack deck, which is honestly, your multi-attack is probably your best win condition. You force out a bunch of awkward guards from your opponent with a bunch of little attacks first, and then you have, because they probably want to be able to take the Vanguard. So giving that extra Persona Ride power is very important if you ever want to have a chance of winning. Now, of course, moving on from there, we do have 4 copies of just the best Flagberg card that has been released. This is Betapologic Dragon. When he's placed on rear from hand, you may soul charge 1. This deck uses quite a bit of soul, so you probably almost always want to be using that. But the main skill is that at the end of the battle that he attacks a Vanguard, if it is either the first battle or the second battle of that turn, and you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard Flagberg, you can either counterblast 1 or EB3 in order to restand this unit, and he gets another 10k. So this card is kind of individually holding the entire deck on his back. This card just being able to combo with literally any multi-attacker that you have just makes it infinitely good. This card can solo if you have 2 copies of him. You can literally just use both of them. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then literally if you see any other multi-attacker, he just, you know, lets you get those 5 attacks. And he uses energy, which is something that the deck desperately needs to use, because it's using pretty much every other resource. And then of course, if you do only if you run out of energy, you can always rely on that counterblast. It's kind of just like hard to stress just how good this card is, but unfortunately it is in fact locked in a terrible deck. If we ever get a new Flagberg, this guy will certainly be much, much better. All right, so finishing off our grade 1 unit cards, I am actually playing 1 copy of Inlet Pulse. It actually goes with this 1 copy of Shelling Dragon. I'll just quickly review their effects. Inlet Pulse we haven't talked about for a long time. Personally, I still don't really like him, but you know, it's in Flagberg, and he's a 1-of, so you can't draw inlets off inlets. But then about he attacks, if you have a if your opponent is on grade 3 and you are on specifically the Flagberg Dragon, Soul Blast 1 to restand him. So he combos obviously with this. You go 1, 2, and then 3, 4. So he is there, but of course the bad thing about Inlet Pulse Dragon, even in his own deck, is that he only works going second. So if you have this guy out with literally anything else, that's still only 4 attacks, so you're not getting a triple door or hitting over defensive, because Flagberg is such a bad card. But of course the other skill, at the end of turn, if you attack 4 or more times, slot him into soul, draw a card, which in this deck is not even that good, because ideally you would want to be reborning your Inlet Pulses, but of course playing the 1, it just goes to soul, and this deck surprisingly does not have a good way to Soul Blast during the main phase. So he kind of just ends up getting stuck there. So he still sucks, even in his good in the only deck he goes. And then of course we have Shelling Dragon. From the back row center, you may counterblast 1 at the start of the battle phase in order to give him an extra 10k, and he may attack from back row. But unfortunately, just like Inlet Pulse, this is also locked behind your opponent beyond grade 3. So that's what I mean when I say that they basically serve the same purpose, where these are your multi-attackers, but they only work if you're going second or if it's turn 4. So literally these are kind of interchangeable depending on what resource you have access to. This allows you to get 6 attack, but of course it uses Counterblast, which this deck does not really have any Counterblast to spare. So you pretty much just use it if you're going for like the final push, assuming you can see it and have it. Now our last non-shields, our last grade 3 card, is going to be just 1 copy of the Forbid All Surrogate. Obviously this card being super, super impactful and super necessary for the deck to even function. It makes it, it gives you access to this a little bit more easier. It is, you know, the 5th copy of it essentially, but you know, of course it also gives you access to these. Assuming you draw into this and this, you can literally call this, and then hoping your opponent is on grade 3 already, you can go ahead and play Forbid. I'll call both of these and get your 6 attacks for pretty free. It's good if you see it. Unfortunately, if you don't, like, you're still fine because you have all their multi-attackers, and of course you can always just draw into these or reborn them if you draw into them too early. But you know, it's there for a very good push turn if you see it. Right, so moving on into the grade 2s, we are playing 4 copies of the newest card from BT 8. This is the Wise Brave Shooter. And he is very solid. So if you are on Flagberg, he does gain boost, which is, you know, very appreciated, especially since you have some grade 3s that are attacking, so you can make them 23 on their first swing. And then of course that one specific grade 1 that restands gets another 10k, so he'll be 23 yet again. But the main skill we like him for is when he is placed on rear. If you have a Flagberg Vanguard, EB3, choose a Tier Dragon from your drop and you may call it to rear guard. So he allows you to reborn those Tier Dragons that get lost to the drop zone. Or maybe you need to discard in the early game because they are non-shield. So he definitely allows you to get away with discarding more, which is the main reason why we switched over to the Cristianos ride line, because, you know, if we draw into them, we just pitch them and then we revive them later. Moving on, we are going to be playing 3 copies of Arix. Now, Arix is both a good card and a terrible card. When she attacks, at the end of the battle, she attacks. If it is the second battle of that turn, you may Soul Blast 1 to restand her and give her 5k power. There is technically, you do need to be on Flagberg, and he also needs to be stand, which obviously is always going to be happening most of the time. I don't know why you would swing a Flagberg first, but this card is good and it's also very bad. So the good part about this card, it is not locked behind your opponent being grade 3, so that makes her better than Inlet Pulse Dragon. The bad parts, 1, she has to attack a Vanguard, and she doesn't have any extra power on the first swing. So she can be literally swinging in for 10k unless you give her a boost. And then when she restands, she gets 5k, so at least she hits, you know, the Vanguard. But unfortunately, that doesn't really do much if they happen to, you know, hit a defensive, so you're still swinging like 15. Usually you would end up having like a column of these because she does need the extra power. So you're usually always swinging with 20 or 18, which is not really good numbers, so it's kind of unfortunate. The one saving grace behind this is that a lot of the times your opponent is going to be guarding a lot of your early attacks just because they're scared of the Vanguard's triple door, so you know they might end up just committing a lot of guard and you don't really have to worry about defensives in that case. But yeah, she's not really that great, but we need her in case we go first and we won't need to do our 5 attacks. She's like the only decent way to actually get there. All right, so most of that was actually the engine of our deck. Now we get into the non-engine. So because the engine for this deck is so small, you actually have a lot of non-engine space in this deck. So what I have been doing is I've been using a bunch of cycle cards to kind of glue the deck together and try and make it functional. Of course, the first of which being 4 copies of Love Binding Maiden Margaret. So this is the Sokea's cycle card. Obviously, if you discard during the ride phase, Soul Blast 1, put it to the bottom of the deck, draw a card. And then, of course, she does have the other skill. If you Persona Ride, you can stun 2 of your opponent's rear guards for Counterblast 1. Most of the time, you're not going to be using that because obviously your Counterblast is very, very tight. And also, you know, you probably don't even want to call her. She's not a multi-attacker. But this card is pretty decent, especially with the Cristianos ride line. If you see copies of her off of the 2 draw here, you can actually pitch them and still use her skill because it is, in fact, still the ride phase. The problem with that is, you know, using up a lot of soul. Thankfully, in this deck, the only things that are really using soul is our cycle cards as well as Eric's. I don't believe anything else really uses soul, and you just need 1 for Eric. So, like, as long as you can, when you ride up to grade 3, you'll always have 1 soul, assuming you don't use a cycle card, or if you see something else that gives you soul, like if you see the grade 3, you can call it soul charge 1, and now you have enough soul to multi-attack. Now, of course, the other cycle card that I'm going to be playing is I'm actually playing 3 copies of the Rainbow Cycler for Stoicheia. Of course, when this one is, unfortunately, only discarded to ride from the ride deck, so no funny little shenanigans. Or when it's placed on rear, so it does a little extra versatility. Soul Blast 1, and then you get a Persona shield ticket to your hand. And then when he attacks grade 3 or greater Vanguard, he gets 5k, so it's 15k attacker. So actually a decent attacker if you have to call it. The good thing is he is actually a tier dragon, so he does have some synergy with this. So if you're in a pinch and you don't have one of the grade 3s and drop for whatever reason, you can always call this, reborn this, and then you have a 25k line there. So, you know, a little bit of versatility there. Unfortunately, this pretty much uses all your soul. If you draw like too many of these, then you might not be able to use them all, especially if you draw Margaret's off of the grade 1. All right, so moving on into our grade 1 lineup. I feel really bad that this deck is still kind of reliant on Prize Trident. From what I've been noticing, you kind of need 2 CB in order to do some really good combo plays or to get to your 5 attacks a lot of the time. You can theoretically do it with 1 CB, but ideally you would like to have 2, because if you have 2 of the grade 3 dragon, that's going to cost you 2 CB, assuming you've used up all of your energy, because you use EB3 for one of them and then Counterblast 1 for the other one, and then of course you still need 1 more Counterblast for Flagberg, which is, you know, great and all. But this effectively just makes Flagberg skill free. Unfortunately, this is not real countercharge. I haven't even talked about him, but if it's when you attack during the 5th battle, you slide him to soul countercharge 1. But it's not real countercharge, because the only way you're ever getting to 5 attacks in this deck or any deck is with Counterblast, except for Magnoli, I guess, but, you know, Elder specifically. But, you know, it's just fake Counterblast, because, like, you're not countercharging, you're essentially just making your skills 1 Counterblast less. But it is also good for rushing, which, you know, you kind of would like to have, because if you have rush, then it makes it easier to kill with your Vanguard. Your Vanguard is pretty threatening. So, you know, any early game pressure that you can lay on your opponent is pretty solid. Now, the only other grade 1 I'm actually playing in this deck is 2 copies of Burrow Mushrooms. Not really for the plant tokens, mostly for the soul, because if you do see this in the early game and you see a bunch of cyclers, it means that you can use 1 extra cycler. You just get plant tokens, which, you know, good for rushing. But yeah, that's basically it. You don't really need to play this. This is a bit of like a flex thought. This is more non-engine. It's just kind of there if you see it. But you can definitely play pretty much anything. You play like the 4th Eric's. You play the 4th cycler if you really want to. I just thought we had kind of had too many cyclers, and I would always just run out of soul, considering you only like can use 3 cyclers, because you have to soul blast your 1, 2, 3, and 2, 1, 0, 1, and 2, and then you left with no soul. So if you don't Persona Ride, you're kind of fucked the next turn. But yeah, Alright, so getting the basic stuff out of the way, of course we are playing the 4 PGs. As always, play Elementaria if you care about this deck. I do not. Our trigger lineup is actually a little bit awkward. I'm playing 3 Alanas just because I didn't want to pull another one out. And then I'm actually only playing 6 crits in this deck. Like, yes, your Vanguard is pretty threatening and you would like to hit crits on it because, you know, that pushes 2 damage, especially if they're at 4. It makes it that much more risky to guard the Vanguard, but literally you probably only need 1 to hit 1 crit. And unfortunately, I think this deck needs a little bit more glue to hold it together. Obviously, ideally, you should always be playing the Tear Dragon crits because you do have synergy with Tear Dragons. So obviously, play the correct, you know, unit, not just this because this can't be reborn. But basically, the other glue that I've been using to hold this deck together is I am not playing just 4 draws. I'm actually playing 5 draws. 5 draws actually does feel kind of nice. You hit them pretty often, and like I said, this deck is very piece reliant. So being able to see your pieces a little bit pretty consistently does feel pretty good. And of course, draws, especially this draw, are always just good pitch targets off of your ride line. If you draw into them, you just like easily pitch them. Sometimes draws are nice, especially since your deck doesn't really have, since your deck is kind of OTK focused, like you're just kind of trying to get to your main play and you're not really living more than like 2 turns in this current format. Of course, we are going to be playing 4 heals, a bunch of mismatch, because, you know, this is Flagberg, he gets the leftovers. Then, of course, over triggered, of course, just playing Blessed Favor. Blessed Favor is just, like, the best. Alright, so that is going to do it for my Flagberg deck profile. I do actually have a different build that I have in mind, which is a little more rush focused. If you guys actually want to see that, you know, let me know, and I'll sleeve it up and test it. But, you know, it's about as functional as this deck is, which is, you know, about as functional as most Flagberg decks are. Basically, the deck is a kind of flimsy boss unit, decent rear guards, and a bunch of glue that is trying to stick them all together. Unfortunately, Flagberg just needs more than, you know, new rear guards. He is going to need a new Vanguard if this deck is going to ever be playable. And if, you know, we do get a decent enough Vanguard, I do think Flagberg with his good, solid support could always see, like, kind of rogue contention once again, which I would love to see. But until that day, he is going to be stuck on the bottom tiers. But that's going to be it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do those 2 things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.